Hi everyone, thank you for coming back to my channel. I'd like to talk about the Vatican today and the Vatican connections to the UK monarchy, US government, and other Western countries' government in Europe, as well as all the secret societies. Okay, let's get started. The Vatican conspiracy, the mafia, the CIA, and the Vatican's intelligence apparatus. Albert Vincent Caron is one of those people who spent his life dancing between raindrops and turning invisible wherever a shadow lingered. He existed and also didn't exist. Al Caron, unlike his near namesake Al Capone, truly was a paradox wrapped in a mystery concealed behind an enigma. Caron was a detective in the New York police department, but this didn't stop him from becoming a made man in the Genovese crime family. He knew all the leading mafiosi of his day, including Vito Giovanese, Sam Giancana, Santo Trafficante, Joe Colombo, and Polly Castellano, amongst others. To Caron's daughter, Dee, they were all known as Uncle. When she got married, her father arranged two different reception rooms to separate the mob guests from the NYPD guests. But this was more window dressing than anything else. One of Caron's principal functions in the NYPD was to act as the bagman in protecting shipments of CIA drugs to the various mafia families. Caron died in 1990 under mysterious circumstances. This followed a period of great personal disenchantment with his life. Following a secretive mission to Mexico in 1985, when a large number of innocent women and children died unnecessarily. His death was horrific. Reports Mike Ruppert, editor from the Wilderness newsletter, who has investigated Caron's life story and written a special report on it. Meanwhile, another uncle was Bill Casey, director of the Central Intelligence Agency during the Reagan administration. Casey had been with the Office of Strategic Services during World War II. During 1970s, he became chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates the U.S. investment industry. During his tenure in that role, Casey used Caron as a cutout to pass sensitive insider information to mob capo Polly Castellano, says his daughter Dee. Caron was also a full colonel in the U.S. Army, where he had operated in the Army's Counterintelligence Corps. Unsurprisingly, in view of his close friendship with Bill Casey, he was also a covert operative for the CIA. But that wasn't half of it. Caron was also a Grand Knight of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, which historically has been the military arm of the Vatican and is regarded as a separate state with full powers of statehood, including issuing its own diplomatic passports. In more recent decades, SMOM has acted as a funding conduit, a black market gold channel, and money laundering for the CIA, amongst others, and is known to act as the Vatican's intelligence arm. It was alleged to be involved in, for example, the disappearance of Russia gold reserves over 2,000 metric tons, which vanished during 1991, around the time that Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev was ousted from office. Malta knighthoods are awarded to many leading individuals who are part of the military and intelligence community. The CIA's Bill Casey, for example, was a Knight of Malta, former NATO general, and later U.S. Secretary of State Alexander Haig is also a Malta Knight. Another is General Vernon Walters, the former deputy director of the CIA under DCI George Bush, and later appointed a roving ambassador during the Reagan administration. The legendary head of the OSS, Wild Bill Donovan, was made a knight along with his wartime compatriot and later CIA Chief of Counterintelligence James Jesus Angleton and John McCone. Another prominent member of the U.S. Spook Agency was also distinguished with a Malta knighthood. The list goes on. Most interesting, Reinhard Gehlen, the former Nazi intelligence expert recruited by the U.S. in 1945 to 46 to head the Gehlen Org, a secret German-based intelligence arm of the United States that was composed of former SS and Gestapo agents, many of whom, including Klaus Barbie, were wanted Nazi war criminals. The foregoing names amount to a listing of some of the most powerful, influential members of the Western intelligence community over the last 5 decades. One Vatican group that has extremely close ties to the Knights of Malta is the ultra right-wing Opus Dei. This is an immensely powerful faction in the Vatican today, and its public do-good activities eclipse a plethora of the darkest political and financial machinations known to man. It will not come as a surprise, perhaps, that Caron was closely associated with Opus Dei and in particular with a covert operation that had its origin back in 1944. This was Operation Amadeus, from red lines to drug smuggling routes. This highly secretive operation was part of the Operation Sunrise negotiations conducted between Allen Dulles, the then senior wartime OSS officer in Switzerland, but later to become the director of the CIA, and SS General Karl Wolff. This debonair and well-connected SS officer commanded the SS and Gestapo contingents in Italy at the time. The result of these negotiations was an agreement affording amnesty to an extensive roster of SS Gestapo forces in exchange for their agreement to shift their allegiance to the West in the pre-planned covert battle aimed at defeating the Soviet Communist menace, in other words, the Cold War. One spin-off of these Dulles-Wolff arrangements were the Vatican-run Red Lines that aided wanted Nazi war criminals to slink to safety. Tens of thousands of SS and other Nazi escaped capture as a result of the Red Lines. These included such figures as Franz Stengel, commandant at Treblinka extermination camp, and his friend Gustav Wagner, who ran the Sobibor death camp. Others to escape in this manner included Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust. Eichmann was later captured by Israeli intelligence agents, smuggled to Tel Aviv, where he stood trial and was eventually executed. In comparison, Dr. Joseph Mengele, known as the White Angel, a war criminal wanted for his cruel and inhuman experiments on death camp inmates at Auschwitz, escaped to Argentina and lived a long life. Operation Amadeus was exclusively concerned with the flight of SS and Nazi war criminals to the South American continent and their later ferocious covert actions against the indigenous populations justified under the banner of anti-communism. One individual engaged in Amadeus activities was former Gestapo officer Klaus Barbie, known to the world as the Butcher of Lyon. The principal means of funding Operation Amadeus activities was the hugely profitable narcotics business. Large stocks of SS Mafia had been smuggled out of Europe and into Catholic South America at the end of the war in accordance with the Sunrise Agreement. The Mafia was accompanied by looted SS gold and large quantities of counterfeit British banknotes forged in concentration camps by captive but skilled counterfeiters as part of an SS scheme known as Operation Bernhardt. The escape lines used to move wanted men around South America away from the prying eyes of Israeli agents. Also proved ideal as smuggling routes for drugs. Decades later, the stocks of heroin smuggled into the United States for distribution by the CIA, protected mafia would be complemented with locally grown cocaine. One of the figures to emerge into the spotlight during the 1980s, who was deeply involved in this narcotics traffic, was Colonel Oliver North, who authorized the exchange of guns for drugs to finance Contra operations. Oliver North was known to El Caron under his work name John Caffrey. This was the time when Caron was engaged in CIA-controlled cocaine transactions with Joe Pickles Persilia, a member of the Colombo crime family. These curious and usually concealed connections between governments, organized crime, the Vatican, and Nazi war criminals have some significant history. Not least was the secret agreement reached between U.S. naval intelligence officers and Mafia Don Charles Lucky Luciano during World War II. This resulted in the Mafia's decision to aid and assist the Allies by contacting mob figure Vito Genovese in 1943 to prepare the way for the Allied landing in Sicily. As earlier outlined, it was primarily those SS Gestapo units located in Italy under command of SS General Wolf that were initially concerned in the Operation Sunrise negotiations. And while large numbers of former Nazis were fleeing south to fight the communist menace in Latin America, and more importantly, to profit personally from their involvement in the lucrative drug and gun business in Europe, the spade work was being laid to overthrow or thwart democratically elected governments via a network of fascist men stay behind units organized under the aegis of Operation Gladio. Not surprisingly, this would also lead to certain involved figures making personal fortunes out of their people's mystery, a circumstance that is so commonplace it is barely worth mentioning. These neo-fascist activities would come to prominence in the early 1980s, following the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano and the death of Italian banker Roberto Calvi, who was suicided and left hanging under London's Blackfriars Bridge. This would lead to sensational disclosures about the role of the Vatican Bank, the IOR, in Calvi's financial empire, and would quickly grow to include the activities of Mafia Financiera Michele Sindona, whose activities in turn would implicate leading blue blood banks in Europe and America in mafia activities. Both Sedona and Cavi were close to opacity, which lost around $55 million when Sindona's empire crashed. According to his family, Roberto Calvi was deeply engrossed in helping opacity take control of the IOR when he was killed. Meanwhile, both Calvi and Sindona were members of the secretive propaganda do P2 Masonic Lodge, which is said to have been a parallel government in waiting and which planned to effect a coup d'etat in Italy following a Communist Party victory at the polls. P2 was run by former Italian physicists and member of the Nazi SS, dubbed the puppet master by the Italian press. Jelly's connections to the ultra hard right and physicists in Europe and Latin America were extensive. In fact, he had been deeply involved in establishing the Vatican-run red lines that aided the worst Nazi war criminals to escape Allied justice at the end of World War II. All told, an estimated 50,000 Nazis were helped to freedom. Jelly had numerous powerful friends, including former Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. He was also a personal friend of Argentina's General Juan Perón, and his close associations with Argentina would later lead him to be a key figure in shipping a supply of French Exocet missiles to sink British task force ships during the Falklands War. In this endeavor, he worked closely with Ronald Rearward, founder of Hawaiian-based financial institution Bishop Baldwin Rearward, Dillingham and Wrong, a CIA proprietary company and forerunner of the CIA-owned Nugan Hand Bank. The involvement of a CIA front company engaged in financing and providing weapons to be used against a key American ally. With the wholehearted public support of the U.S. government may seem somewhat duplicitous. However, in the world of black ops, friends and enemies are interchangeable words, and working both sides of the fence is accepted practice. In terms of hierarchy, Jelly reported to Umberto Ortolani, described by one writer as the Great Vatican Door Opener and Secret Chamberlain of the Papal House. In addition to his P2 connections, Ortolani is also a member of the Inner Council of the Knights of Malta and has military intelligence connections that dates back to World War II. The Octopus and the Spider. There are numerous other Masonic groups and secret societies in Europe which move in and out of focus at various times. Almost all of them are Catholic in nature. One of these is the Priory of Sion, a secretive order that first came to public attention via the best-selling book, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, published in 1982. The Priory is closely connected with the alleged treasure of Solomon, which is said to have found its way to the small village of Rennes-le-Château in southwestern France, where it is said to have been buried by the Knights Templars, forerunners of the Knights of Malta. The Priory, whose headquarters were located at Annemasse near Geneva, on the Swiss border, are styled as the guardians of Solomon's treasure, but most interestingly, they have numerous subterranean connections to physicists and those on the far right that date back to World War II. Meanwhile, it has to be noted in passing that Annemasse is said to have been the center for the anti-communist stay-behind units of Operation Gladio. If it is not intriguing enough, another fact stretches a coincidence to the point of bursting. In recent years, the Priory of Sion has moved its headquarters to Barcelona and now boasts a Spanish Grand Master. This one could conclude is to enable it to be physically closer to the historical heartland of Opus Dei, which was founded in Spain in 1928. Otto Scorsese was a leading force in running the SS Brotherhood escape routes. The Spider after the war, and SS General Karl Wolff was the lead negotiator with OSS Sweet Chief Alan Dulles. Then another Nazi, Walter Ruff, head of the Milan SD, was one of two liaisons with the Vatican involved in the establishment of the Nazi smuggling system. Earlier in his career, Ruff had overseen the development of the Nazis' mobile gas vans known as Black Ravens, which gassed to death around 100,000 Jews, mostly women and children, by pumping exhaust fumes into the back of an hermetically sealed van. Another important link between the Vatican and SS escape routes was Frederick Swan, who was also the man in charge of laundering forged SS bank looks before World War II. Schwartz was an international arms dealer who shipped weapons to China and Russia. He was also the investment manager of the family fortune of his first wife's aunt, Baroness Germagen Gutenberg, of the vastly wealthy Argentina-based Bunch family of the massive transnational firm Bunch Corporation that is also known as the Octopus. This title is interesting, for it may connect to the so-called octopus that ties into murderer freelance journalist Danny Casolaro, who at the time of his death in 1991 was investigating a number of high-level illegalities, including the theft by the Department of Justice of a tracking computer program known as Promise. Casolaro was writing a book about what he had discovered and originally titled it Behold, a Pale Horse, but later modified it to The Octopus. In a draft page of the book, he described this group as an international cabal whose freelance services covered parochial political intrigue, espionage, sophisticated weapon technologies that include biotoxins, drug trafficking, money laundering, and murder for hire. Casolaro further stated that this cabal was founded 30 years ago in the shadow of the Cold War. If you already watched my previous video, the CB count, which is the Clinton body count, you know that Casolaro, he was also writing a book to expose the Clinton body count. After Cosolaro's death, journalist Carol Marshall followed up his investigation and wrote an unpublished manuscript titled The Last Circle. In this, Marshall describes her investigation of Robert Booth Nichols, one of the central figures of the Octopus, whom she describes as being part of a secretive group known as the Chosen Ones, and who wore skull and crossbones rings and shared a common interest, if you could call it that, in the old German SS occultism is tribal and inner circle rites. During her continuing investigation into the octopus, Marshall found that the SS occultism outlined above was connected to Lieutenant Colonel Michael A. Aquino, a former U.S. Green Beret who is a self-professed Satanist and who held a top-secret security clearance for his work in military intelligence and unclassified psychological warfare matters. Aquino officiated at SS black magic ceremonies held at Wilhelmsburg, the castle once used by SS chief Heinrich Himmler to create an SS order of Teutonic Knights based on the Knights Templars. The foregoing connections lend themselves to a larger picture of global interlocking right-wing fascist groupings that operate in the shadowland of deniable military and intelligence operations associated with profits during World War II and later throughout the Cold War. In this respect, it is intriguing to note that the Priory of Sion, one of the foremost Catholic groups under discussion, uses as a symbol something that is variously described as an octopus or a spider on its documents. The Priory's association with the octopus could easily relate to the so-called octopus described above, where organized crime works hand in glove with operatives from U.S. intelligence and the military. If one decides, on the other hand, that the Priory symbol is a spider, there is the intriguing notion of the Vatican-run Nazi escape lines of Austrian Catholic Otto Skorzeny and his SS Brotherhoods, the Spinner. The business of God. El Caro was, as mentioned earlier, a made man of the Genovese mob in addition to his other associations. It is curious, therefore, to note that one of the leading lights of the octopus, according to the writer Carol Marshall, was ultra right-wing oil tycoon Clint Murchison, owner of the Dallas Cowboys football team. Murchison's oil company, Murchison Oil Lease Company, was 20% owned by Gerardo Catena, the chief lieutenant of the Genovese crime family. Throughout the Second World War and thereafter, there was, according to author Charles Hickam in his book Trading with the Enemy, general agreement of certain major figures of American, British, and German commerce to continue their relations and associations after Pearl Harbor. Hickam adds that he also learned that certain figures of the warring governments had arranged to assist in this activity. Hickam's subsequent research proved that this high cabal, which he dubbed the fraternity, not only existed but benefited handsomely throughout World War II. This led the author to ask, and you can read these questions yourself. Hickham's fraternity has similar characteristics to the so-called octopus and also shows certain similarities to Colonel Oliver North's enterprise. All have engaged in the most dubious and illegal activities for profit, and all operate hand in glove with organized crime. All lean so far to the right, ideologically speaking, that the word fascist can be used without reservation. Meanwhile, none of them cares very much for the woes of humanity, and indeed, they appear committed to stomping on ethics and moral values wherever they meet them. The octopus, or octopus, as one European documentary film producer renders the spelling when referring to Opus Dei, which began live on 2nd October 1928, has 8 arms that surround its mouth and 3 hearts, and is therefore not prone to starving or dying. But it can also be identified by these octodities. Opus Dei, the group that is now in control of the Vatican, is undoubtedly one arm of this global criminal network in this writer's view. Or are the 3 hearts of the octopus more vital to identify? Analogous to the church, state, and mafia, the forces that prevail beneath the play of the shadows of the world? There is yet another interesting twist to this accumulation of associations. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. The prince was the founding chairman of the publicity-shy Western power elite, the Bilderbergers. This shadowy and secretive group meets over a weekend in May or June each year under an almost total media blackout. Powerful and very influential figures from the world of banking, business, politics, the media, trade unions, and academia are invited. Included regularly, for example, are Dr. Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller, and Italy's kingmaker Gianni Lilly. The first meeting took place in May 1954. This strangely was the same year that Prince Bernhard became head of the Johannite Order in Netherlands, one of the four orders that make up the chivalric alliance of Orders of St. John. The stated purpose of these four, known as the Alliance, which is composed of northern European nations Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Great Britain, the latter being an ancient order known as the most venerable order, is to reduce to silence the enemies of Christ. The headquarters of the alliance are located in Switzerland. These are Protestant orders rather than Catholic, but it is of significance that on 26 November 1963, the alliance was consolidated with the signing of a joint declaration between the Sovereign Military Order of Malta and the Most Venerable Order at St. John's Gate, London, by the Grand Chancellor of the SMOM, the Prince of Risultano, and Lord Wickhurst, Lord Priory of the Most Venerable Order. In other words, the Catholic and Protestant orders bound themselves to work together to silence the enemies of Christ, a clear reference to communism. Interestingly, it has been suggested that the Knights Templars were infected with the Johannite or Mandean heresy that denounced Jesus as a false prophet and in his place recognized John the Baptist as the true Messiah. Meanwhile, two early Grand Masters of the Priory of Sion are said to have had Johannite tendencies, Leonardo da Vinci and Sir Isaac Newton, notwithstanding that the famous founder of the Knights Templars, huge depians, has been accused by the Vatican of being a Johannite. Leaving aside this brief foray into esoteric history, it is as well to note that Prince Bernhard, in addition to his Bilderberg role and as head of the Dutch Johannite Order, was also an honorary member of Himmler's SS and worked in NW7, the global intelligence arm of IG, which acted in the interests of the Nazi cause. The activities of NW7 in Latin America before, during, and after World War II are deeply interwoven in this story. In facilitating and allying itself with many of the foregoing activities, the Vatican aimed to help eradicate a communist ideology that despised Christianity. Opus Dei and a host of other Catholic confessors, secret groups engaged in a litany of murder, money laundering, drug peddling, arms trafficking, concealment of World War II loot, embezzlement, manipulation of financial markets, and many other consummate illegalities. The purpose of all these activities was arguably to allow the Vatican to remain the spiritual bulwark of the Christian West. But if such business is the business of a church preaching of a God in heaven, then Caesar on earth had better watch out. A new landlord has fallen into town. I hope you guys like this video, and of course do your due diligence research and verify the details on this video. And there will be a part 2. I will talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.